Hello everybody, and welcome to the fourth webinar organized by the CORALIS EU project, which was a four-year innovation action project where we tried to implement existing industrial symbiosis ideas in three lighthouses in Europe, and in the process also developed a lot of learning regarding what makes or breaks industrial symbiosis. And different activities were led by different partners. And towards the end of the project, we are also trying to share some of these learnings with a wider audience. And today's topic is policies. Policies often have, or we can say that many of the industrial symbiosis practices, at least the ones that I have seen, have at least one policy leverage for their realization. So policies are quite important for actually creating supportive conditions for industrial symbiosis. But it is not also uncommon that policy comes in the way, either making things difficult, impossible, or sometimes delaying the type of developments that we want to see. So today we are extremely happy and lucky to have some of our CORALIS friends, particularly Dr. Aurela Schitza from Industrial Minerals Association and Luca and Roberta from RINA Consulting. We are also very happy and lucky to have Tobias, which is not a CORALIS member, but Tobias works for a company which is really trying hard to make industrial symbiosis happen with some innovative applications. And I think it will be fair to say that he's definitely not unfamiliar with how the policy can come in the way. So that's why he was very kind to join us to actually share some of his experiences. So without saying much more, I would like to give the screen to Luca to give us some overview of from the study that he recently completed in Rina Consulting that looked into policies and their relationship to industrial symbiosis. Screen is
Okay.
yours, Luca, and you have approximately 12 to 15 minutes. If you can stick to that time frame, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you, Murat. Thank you for the introduction. And I will try to be short to be in line with the timeline. Okay. So to stick to the topic of the webinar, I try to share with you a brief introduction of what is the actual European regulation framework about industrial symbiosis. In particular, for people that maybe could not be so familiar with this concept, industrial symbiosis refers to the cooperative approach where businesses work together to efficiently use discarded resources. In this context, the European Union is pushing and pushing for increasing, improve the quality of reuse of materials, recycling, and prevention. And among all the directives and regulation that were proposed along the years, the two main ones are for sure the RED II directive and the Waste Framework Directive. Okay. Then, for what concerns the Renewable Energy Directive, RED II is well known as RED II. It has the main goal of increasing the use of renewable energy. And then, apart from the general description, it is trying to support industrial symbiosis about using the establishing guidelines for reuse of waste heat. This is a typical approach, considering that a lot of companies are using a lot of heat, but cannot use it as soon it becomes a waste. And then, on the other hand, the RED II is encouraging collaboration among industry to produce renewable energy. Because sometimes it is possible that companies are interested in producing renewable energy, but it is not so easy for them because maybe they are small or medium enterprises. And this directive is pushing to gather small enterprises to give a better overview of the landscape in the region. Then, uh, except for the waste, the exchange of energy, Waste Framework Directive was the main directive respect to waste management. And it is supporting the industrial symbiosis development, introducing the waste hierarchy that is represented in the picture on the right, that has tried to define a schema to be followed by waste manager. So the first one, obviously, the prevention of waste production. Then with an appropriate design, it is possible to design items to be prepared for use. On the other hand, following there is the recycling part. So if the waste is produced, it could be recycled to recover materials and to create secondary raw materials, or on the other hand, try to recover them. These leave the last part as the disposal of waste. So disposal is the worst scenario that you can have in this situation, and then this is the worst case that can be aimed for waste management. To avoid this final solution, the Waste Framework Directive is setting stricter targets for 2030 and 2035 and 2050, in which waste European member states of the European Union must be compliant. And last but not least, the Waste Framework Directive introduced the definition of byproduct and the end of waste criteria. These two parts, these two definitions are a vital point for the industrial symbiosis process. Indeed, byproduct identification is done to avoid that a substance that it is produced from a industrial process is defined as a waste. Then, apart from the definition, so to be a byproduct, the substance must have a future use. The substance can be used without any further processing. So, apart from the definition, this is a crucial point for the development of industrial symbiosis, because as soon as a substance is defined as waste, it will struggle, because waste management is really, really difficult, and sometimes it can hinder the development of a process. So the first step is trying to avoid that the substance that is created from an industrial process is defined as a waste. So this definition could be and should be the first one to be looked at it if your industrial process is producing some byproduct. Then there is the other part, the other definition, that is the end of waste criteria. And then, as soon as a substance is classified as a waste, it is possible to end this waste definition applying the end of waste criteria. So to apply the end of waste criteria, some condition must be met, and then the resulting substances are used for specific purposes. There is a market for the substances or the objects in general. The resulting substance complies with technical requirements, so it must not be a chemical dangerous product, obviously. And the last one is the use does not have an adverse impact on the environment and on the health, the general health or human health, environment health, and so on. The pyramid that is placed on the right part of the slide is important for this context, because this is the European criteria. So this is the defined criteria in Waste Framework Directive. But it is possible for member states and sometimes to regions inside member states to define their own criteria. So there is another hierarchy. So EU defines the criteria that is reported here. Then the national regulation can define their own criterion, obviously with the consultancy with the European Commission. And then sometimes it is possible to define single case criteria. I'm sorry. Then our work was focused on the defining and identifying which were the shared approaches. And as I was mentioning before, waste hierarchy obviously is well defined and well shared across the Europe. As soon as the definition of byproduct and the waste criteria, energy efficiency and the recovery, and management and registration of chemicals. All these 4 points of the list are well defined as a definition. On the other hand, these definitions sometimes are, we can say, inconsistent. Inconsistent because they can create some ambiguity, because national and regional disparities obviously hinder scalability. Because as I was saying before, the end of waste criteria it is at a European level, then can be national and regional criteria. These 3 different levels can improve the development of industrial symbiosis, but on the other hand, it doesn't create harmonization. So a lack of harmonization obviously create a weak point respect to development of this approach. On the other hand, as Murat was saying in the introduction, material exchange can sometimes be hindered by bureaucratic delays, because it is good to share knowledge, it is good to share materials, it is good to share energy. But if there's not a precise framework in which you can move, it is more and more complicated. Then bureaucracy creates limits, even if there is a mutual interest from companies to share materials and energy. This is the typical aspect that is shared, that is applied in some country. Obviously, I'm Italian, so I must mention Italy to not bother anyone. Italy is the classic example. On the other hand, there is the energy exchange, not only material exchange. Energy exchange, sometimes it is even more difficult respect to waste, to material waste exchange, because it needs high cost infrastructures. These high cost infrastructures cannot be created by small and medium enterprises, but should be pushed and should be supported by big players in specific countries. And sometimes, if you look at Sweden and Turkey, consider the geography of of those nations, it is even worse in the situation, because there is a lot of distance between different industrial sites. Then, to summarize, there is a fragmentation of the national efforts, because nations are pushing to create a good ecosystem for industrial symbiosis, but this lack of harmonization can create inefficiencies for this method. So to summarize in a minute, there is a strong effort across Europe to promote reuse, recycling, energy efficiency, and support industrial symbiosis in general. Then national frameworks promotes this approach, but consider that the lack of a well-defined method to apply the regulation, there's more and more disparities at regional level have been created. And then our main goal should be to create a greater harmonization across Europe and across member states, and create maybe some new decrees directives that incentives give the possibility to small and medium enterprises, leveraging on incentives to create a better ecosystem in which developing industrial symbiosis. Okay. I think more or less I was able to be on time, I think. And
Yes, Luca, you were on time. Thank you very much. Not only were on time, you gave a very thorough and very useful background overview of the policy ecosystem that we have in Europe, which I hope you will agree with me, Arela. This set a very good foundation for you to actually now give us some specific examples where you, from your sector and maybe beyond that, see how the policies actually translate into support mechanisms or hindering difficulties in practice. The screen is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Murat, for giving me the floor. And I really have to thank Luca for setting the legal framework under which our companies actually operate within the European Union. So we have about 250 member companies, and I would like just to point out to a few practical examples that we see on that our members face on the daily way of doing things. And the first question I would like to touch upon is a few examples where different policy elements support the industrial symbiosis. And in here, I would like to link with circular economy initiative, which initially some people were asking why we need this circular economy. Aren't we circular enough? How can we be more circular? And in fact, the idea of circular economy package is to push users, or in our case, raw material producers, to think out of the box. So time being, you do business as usual with things you know, but the idea was also to put in question existing practices and to enable discussions whether within the limits of the site, within the company, to see a bit how we can actually strive to be more circular. And we work in a sector of raw materials, but in fact, circular economy has a much wider definition. It's about materials, so finished products or byproducts or waste valorization. It's about water flows. It's about CO2 valorization. It's about energy recovery or heat recovery. So the idea is also to see what you can do better internally to be more resource energy efficient, but also to think outside of the company boundaries. And I think this is important to bring into the table of the open discussion. How can we basically enable change, whether within the company or outside of the company? And in here, I would like just to provide the example of CORALIS, which in fact is covering the precipitated calcium carbonate, which is a raw material which is produced on site. So in the case of precipitated calcium carbonate, there are about 200 sites in Europe, and 80% of them, they are associated with the pulp and paper production, and they are called satellite plants. So in fact, the PCC operation is next to a pulp and paper operation. And within the CORALIS, we had the chance to visit Frovi, which is a new business model. And trust me, it was a bit of really thinking out of the box, how you can actually valorize the heat, which was never done before, coming from pulp and paper making, to use it for tomato growth in a site in the vicinity of the operation. So they needed to build a pipeline to make sure that CO2 and heat was covered and could be used for tomato growth. So this is really thinking out of the box. So you go from the raw material producers, link with the pulp and paper, which is a good we actually use on our daily base, and how you can create a new business model to grow tomato in Sweden. And out of this new business model, 80% of the tomatoes that are used in Sweden right now, they are produced locally. And this is the kind of switch in the mindset that industrial symbiosis can actually enable. And I would like also to provide the case of a project in also in Nordics, in Nordkalk. And the idea here was to valorize the CO2. And in here we had 3 different sectors involved. So we had lime, which is a mineral. We had cement producer, and we had the insulation sector or construction company that actually brought their minds together. And this is industrial symbiosis across the limits on one specific sector. And the idea was to build low carbon construction products by valorizing the former waste from the tailings and link this with the also with the blast furnace slag and create new mineral wool waste that could be valorized to make construction products that are used for insulation. And this project involved multiple stakeholders with different issues, which together they created a business opportunity which was cross-sectorial, cross-boundaries, and it created a new business model with locally supplied raw materials. Another example I would like to bring to your attention is how the policy can actually hinder the industrial symbiosis. And in here, I would like to touch upon 3 pillars. So each and any of our companies has a permit, which defines the legal and technical conditions under which you can operate as a company within the limits of your site. And this permit is legally binding. If you exceed for a reason or another one your limits, you have to let know the authority that you are exceeding and explain what is the purpose. And the idea to have a permit is to make sure that you operate within the limits and you minimize the risk for a potential accident. The permit allows you to actually extract the raw materials, to process the raw materials. And when you do the processing of these raw materials, you will have some mining waste, which for a reason or another one cannot be valorized. So you have the option to consider this as a byproduct. But as it was already introduced, sometimes the definition of byproducts is not that crystal clear in the law. So you have to define this as a mining waste. However, the mining waste is coming from a European directive. And as we know, a directive has some flexibility. So when you transpose it into national law, you might have a different interpretation of the mining waste definition. And this definition, however it is interpreted, is legally binding at a national level. And the third element I would like to touch upon is the market dynamics. So the big question is, to valorize or not to valorize the mining waste? And if we can do it, what are the right conditions on how we can do it within the legal framework that is described into the European law? So if we go to the practical example, I would like just to highlight for you the case of feldspar extraction and processing. Feldspar is a raw material which you'll use mainly to produce ceramic, but also is used in the glass making. When you do the extraction and processing to extract the feldspar, in the mining waste coming from this process, you will have some amount of lithium. However, when the extraction took place and the processing, there was no market demand for lithium. 30, 40, 50 years ago, nobody was asking for lithium. Nobody knew under which chemical form the market will have this demand for. So at this point in time, it was classified as a mining waste. And to valorize this mining waste or to process for lithium is not part of the feldspar producer. So in your permit, you are supposed only to extract and to process feldspar. So under the new Critical Raw Material Act, you have the legal obligation to actually assess or valorize former mining waste. And the big question is, if we want to valorize this former mining waste to valorize or to extract lithium, you can do it. So it is possible, but at the same time, it is impossible under the existing permit. So if you want to extract lithium, first you have to look what is the definition of this mining waste. So the mining waste law, the mining waste directive allows to classify something as waste, but not to declassify from waste into a byproduct. So this is the first legal challenge that you face as a developer. And the second question is, would you be able to do this lithium valorization as part of the feldspar operations, which means you have to extend your environmental permit beyond your existing boundaries, or you need another legal entity that is going to process to valorize lithium in the same site, but it will be legally a different legal operator. I would like just to provide these few case studies just to open the debate on the possibilities that can be enabled by law, or difficulties or challenges that can be created, but how the law was already designed years ago. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Murat. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the excellent examples, Aurelia. And I actually forgot to mention from the beginning, I hope there's a lot of questions from those that are attending. We are few, we may be able to take them directly, but so that we have a record of your questions, please post them on the meeting chat so that we will make sure to come back to them. Thank you, Aurelia. Very, very interesting, very relevant examples. And with that said, I would like to give the floor to our last but certainly not the least speaker, Tobias. And Tobias, I will also try to bring up your slides.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So
I hope you can hear me all right.
Yes, we hear you well. Are the slides visible?
Yes,
as
now I
well?
can see the slides. Perfect.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, I can
Okay.
just start by introducing myself. My name is Tobias Eriksson, and I work for Rangcells. I'm head of public affairs and EU relations and based in Brussels. And I did my bachelor in Linköping a few years ago, so I was very happy when you contacted me. So thank you so much for having me. We can turn to the next slide. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know Rangcells, we are a waste management company in the transition of becoming a resource producer. When we were founded in 1881, the majority of our business was in the collection of household waste. And today we're not part of that anymore. We do collect some business and industrial waste, but much of our focus is on how we can produce new raw materials from waste. And all our operations are currently undergoing changes, and legislation is, of course, crucial for our business. Therefore, we have been present in Brussels for a couple of years now, and in March last year, we opened our own office. We are located together with other like-minded organizations, which is, of course, very beneficial for us. It gives us early information, which is crucial for us to be able to make the right decisions. And it also gives us a stronger voice and access to early information. Because Rangcells is one stakeholder, roughly 30,000 lobbyists in Brussels. You kind of need to break through the many voices of that coming from lobbyists and by working then with other like-minded companies and organizations. And by doing that, we can kind of amplify our message towards the institutions. So here in Brussels, we work hard to be involved in all the steps of the legislative process, and we are in contact with all the EU institutions to try to change the legislation in a favorable way for us. And to give you an overview of the issues that we are working with, I want to highlight, thank you very much, highlight 3 of our technologies today. These are solutions for producing high-quality phosphorus from sewage and fish sludge, producing nitrogen from wastewater, and then our CO2 project in Estonia. And here on the slide, you can see our phosphorus process. and phosphorus is a nutrient we need to be able to produce the food we eat. We need it as a fertilizer in our fields and as a feed for animals. Today, most of the phosphorus that we use is mined and contains. No, you can stay at the previous step. Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so most of the phosphorus that we use is mined, and it contains contaminants such as cadmium, and contributes. The mining process contributes to significant amounts of CO2 emissions, since it's in many cases has to be transported as well from countries such as Morocco and Russia. But our innovation company, Easy Mining, has developed a technology that extracts phosphorus from the ash of incinerated sewage sludge, which can then be used as a feed phosphate. And this phosphorus is cleaner than the mined phosphorus that we use today. And we can go to the next slide. We also have our fish sludge or fish poo solution, where we in Norway can collect the sludge from fish farms, and after collecting it, we can use it to produce biogas. And the sludge that comes from the fish farms in Norway only could produce and power around 600,000 households. So after we have produced the biogas, we can then take the sludge and incinerate it, and from that extract phosphorus. So the potential of these phosphorus solutions is great. We could help Europe to become self-sufficient in fertilizers and animal feed. But the problem with both these solutions today is that we are not allowed to use our recovered phosphorus for feed in Europe due to EU legislation. We are, however, building our two first factories, one in Germany and one in Sweden anyway. But due to the legislative barriers, we will probably have to export all this clean phosphorus to other markets, and we are already in discussions with Canada. So instead of making use of the resources that we have in our sewage sludge today, Europe will continue to import phosphorus from countries outside Europe, phosphorus that comes with both then health and environmental impacts. So this barrier is something I work very hard with in Brussels to make lawmakers understand that we need to treat resources based on the quality rather than the origin, because that is the main legislative barrier here, that our product is not allowed in Europe because sewage sludge is considered to be waste, and even though we can prove that it is cleaner than what is coming from the mines today, we are not allowed to use it. And we can go to the next slide. Yeah, just to say something about the fish poo project. We are part of a research project or a consortium that's just been awarded Horizon Europe money. So I'm actually calling from Norway because I'm going to attend a 2-day conference with other countries participating in this project. So looking forward to learn more about the ecosystem during this week. And we can go to the next slide. Yes, so as regard our nitrogen solution, we have developed a technology that can remove nitrogen from wastewater. This does not only mean that less nitrogen ends up in the waters, which is bad for the environment because it creates eutrophication. It also means that instead of producing nitrogen fertilizers the traditional way, which is very energy intense and leads to more emissions, we can make use of the resources already in the loop. But the challenge today when it comes to nitrogen, to our nitrogen solution, is that the wastewater treatment plants are not tasked to remove resources. Their role is to do bad things less bad. So in this case, it is the lack of legislation, the lack of circular requirements, and this pull effect that is the barrier. So yeah, we have two very good solutions for the environment, and Europe could be self-sufficient in the production of two key fertilizers this way, and at the same time avoid financing Russia's war in Ukraine. But we're working hard to advocate for a transition of for wastewater treatment plants and treatment plants to go to become resource plants instead. We can go to the next slide. Yes, so when talking about emission reduction, we often focus on reducing CO2 emissions primarily in transport and energy systems, but this is only half of our total emissions. The other 50% is embedded in the materials that we use, and this really shows how important circularity is. Ragn-Sells has developed a technology that extracts calcium oxide from oil shale ash and combines it with carbon dioxide, and by doing so we can produce precipitated calcium carbonate, PCC, that we talked about earlier. So in turn, this PCC made from the oil shale ash can be used to produce new products such as floorings and paints and other construction materials, products that today are produced primarily from mined limestone. And we can go to the next slide. And when then the calcium has been removed, magnesium can be, and other critical raw materials can be extracted from the ash. And we see that the technology today has the potential to produce materials that could account for like 30% of the EU's annual targeted production of magnesium, which would reduce the need for new mining of critical raw materials and also strengthen the EU's autonomy. But once again, today the lack of clear rules and legislation is a barrier. We, for example, don't know today if our technology could be counted as a storage method for CO2, and if it then would be counted as a permanent or a temporary storage method, or who in the value chain who would own the negative emissions. So from a business perspective, we really need clear rules, and they don't exist today. So we're working on our first demo plant today, but we will not be able to further invest in our first real factory if there is still an uncertain future for this. So yes, I think that was my last slide.
Thank you so much, Tobias, for giving us this portfolio of very interesting innovations that you have been working with. And thank you to all the speakers once again for the very interesting insights. While our guests in the webinar are thinking about the questions that hopefully they have, I have a couple of things that I would like to bring up or go back to, not particularly directed to any of the speakers. Whoever feels comfortable, please jump in. Luca and Arela, you mentioned that there are significant differences. So the directive might be the same at the EU level, but sometimes the framework works in such a way that the countries have some maneuverability to actually adapt it to their contexts. And sometimes maybe just the implementation differs from different contexts. And I have actually two questions related to that. But first one would be, will you be able to tell a bit more about the inconsistencies that creates between different countries, or perhaps even within the countries? Do we have cases like that we can explain? I see you smiling, Aurelia. Would you like to maybe take the first shot at that? You are muted.
I'm more than happy to share sometimes some unfortunate cases we actually observe or our members observe. If I take the example of some companies operating, for example, in different European countries, the same directive is transposed totally in a different way, which means that even if you want to be circular at corporate level, you have to work locally. You need to adapt locally. And just to give you an example, for example, in Germany, when you remove the topsoil, you can use that for biodiversity restoration later on. So in principle, you should not consider that to be a waste. It's a byproduct that you are storing aside, and you'll be able to use it later on for biodiversity restoration later on in the process when you have already finished to extract and to develop that specific site. In Spain, exactly the same operation for the same raw material. If you touch the soil, you consider that as a waste. And this is coming from exactly the same European Framework Directive. However, the way it is interpreted, the way it is transposed locally or regionally, because Germany and Spain, they have the beauty to work on federal level or on regional or lander level in Germany or in Spain within the different regions. This shows a bit that for a company operating in these two countries, they need to actually adapt what these differences mean in practice. And this, at some point, it can be an opportunity, but it can also be a bottleneck, because if you consider your topsoil to be considered a waste, then you need to be able to discuss with the authority to declassify and be able to restore, or you have to purchase land elsewhere in order to do your biodiversity works once you have it on your site. So this creates sometimes some inconsistencies, which on the ground, they might create some issues with regard to smooth the business model you are actually operating within. And this for me is something that we need to have more discussions about that. That can be a first learning. So you share experiences from different operators. But I think also at the European Commission level, they should be able to provide some guidelines on how to interpret these definitions in as harmonious way as possible. And this will avoid that, or will limit the freedom to interpret them in a different way and create some inconsistencies also at the national or at local level.
Thank you, Aurelia. Yes, this was very interesting. And you actually partially answered the question that I'm going to ask again. But then there must be also some good practices
Absolutely.
from different contexts that, I mean, for example, I look also linking to what you have been talking about, this end of waste criteria. We also struggle that quite a lot in the Swedish context. There are very lengthy and uncertain processes to actually qualify a waste stream as a non-waste. And I can also share maybe a good, interesting thing that we uncovered in the CORALIS project. But I think there are also countries which have worked with guidelines that makes it a bit easier. And I don't know whether you also looked into that, Luca, but I think it came to my attention. For example, Spain is now added to the portfolio of companies where they already created guidelines. Basically says that if the waste fulfills X and Y criteria, it's okay to put it into applications A and B. But do you have anything to build on that, Luca, or do you see any other good practices that the same law is actually applied in a way to support industrial symbiosis that maybe the other countries can try to learn from?
Yeah, I think that in this case there are some good examples obviously for the application of national criterias. But I think that in this moment this could be there are good examples, but the most critical part is related to which are the obstacles for the application of these examples. Because Spain, you mentioned very, very good, because it was one of the key member states that I deepened my attention during the work on CORALIS, is speeding up the process of the definition of when and the waste criteria at regional levels. But this increase in the speed of the regulation development created this alignment, because the main idea of regional authorities in Spain was, okay, we don't have a precise framework at European level, at national level. So I want to ease the development of some specific industrial process. So I tried to create a criteria that is specific for this kind of activity. But obviously, this is not then reflected at national level and at the European level. So Aurelia explained it really well this part, and there is a need of clarity and a framework that is precise with some guidance to be applied not for a single case scenario, because there are too many scenarios possible for industrial for industrial sector, but there should be at least some micro areas in which you can understand if you fit in some areas or in another one. Because right now, and it is obviously my honest opinion, and the Waste Framework Directive was amended, okay, but the end of waste criteria was based, and the byproduct definition is something that was defined 15 years ago. Okay, it was 2008. Okay, we are now it is February 2025, and there should be some, or a new amendment or some new directive that is pushed in that direction. Because I didn't mention it before, because I wanted to give you an introduction of the topics that Ariela mentioned before, after myself and Tobias then. But obviously, industrial symbiosis is not defined in Waste Framework Directive. There's not a paragraph dedicated to industrial symbiosis. This is an approach that is right now well spread across Europe. So more or less anyone in Europe knows what is industrial symbiosis, but there's not a defined regulation or directive that is explaining how to do it, which are the main constraints, which are the benefits. So there's not something dedicated to industrial symbiosis. This could be a real good development for European directive, for European directives, or European framework, to have a regulation, a directive that is dedicated to this topic, because this topic obviously covers a lot of activities. We mentioned in the last 50 minutes minerals, respect to sludge or biogas. Every industrial process creates byproducts and wastes. The approach should be general, and then obviously speaking with operators that are facing with good practices right now would be the best approach to create an harmonized system across Europe.
Thank you. This is excellent, Luca. It also brings me to another point, because am I correct to think that it is not only the formal laws and regulations that are written, but also how they're interpreted and implemented also makes a difference. One thing, for example, we hear quite often is the permit processes. Of course, the permit processes are often is a source of complaint, maybe quite rightly, that people say they may take too long and they are too uncertain and they can take, they can be very costly. But actually, you're right, Luca, that industrial symbiosis maybe is not explicitly spelled out, but some of the regulations, like Industrial Emissions Directive, has actually best available technology descriptions or best available practice descriptions, which are aligned with industrial symbiosis. Like the energy intensive one says that, okay, when you set up an energy intensive plant, you need to look into integration possibilities with your neighbors, etc. Which to me, it sounds like very much in the hands of the permit officers to actually really pay attention to that and leverage that, or maybe refute that. Do you also see, or Tobias, maybe before I move to my question, you raised your hand. Did you want to say something related to what Luca has started? Maybe we can take that first.
No, I just wanted to add on this problem with differences in implementation.
Okay, then maybe you can just take it and just build on that. And if you have any views about the processes itself, maybe that is also interesting to hear.
Because it's very, very interesting and also problematic. To give a few examples, when the environmental quality norms of good ecological standard in waters were set, Sweden decided to be best in class. So to ensure good conditions, we then based the standards on the values before the country introduced agriculture, which means that the slightest change in quality is negative, and it's therefore very difficult to get environmental permits. And this was also a problem for us then when we tried to get environmental permit for our phosphorus factory. On the contrary, Finland implemented the quality criteria based on how it was before the Second World War. So everything they do is now better than compared to how it was 90 years ago. So even though we have common legislation, it is implemented differently, which is clearly a barrier here, and it in the end also creates unfair competition on the single market.
Excellent that you raised that, but very good. Aurelia, I see that you have your hand up.
Yes.
Does anyone feel like following up to what I tried to start a bit ago? Or yeah, please go ahead, Aurelia.
I can build up on that because I don't find the hand, how to raise the hands in the IT
Yeah,
system.
it's not easy.
No, but just building up on what Luca was saying about the need about legal framework. Under the European Union, we are used to have a legal framework. Without which the authorities, in a certain way, they don't know how to move forward. And let me use the CORALIS examples in two different settings. When we submitted the CORALIS proposal, the idea was to have a plant of using industrial symbiosis, and the initial idea was to have it in Organas. So there was a preliminary discussion with the authority that the site will be opened in this specific location. And when we received the grant, and it was the time to really go and apply for the permit and provide all the technical details, the authority says, I don't have experience to give you a permit on this specific location because I don't know. I don't have practical experience, or I don't have another case study that helps me to give you the permit and to establish this industrial symbiosis project in this area. So this is an example where the lack of legal framework stops or hinders the permitting authority to move forward and to give you a permit to test something or to connect the different flows. The other example, which is totally different, is the Frove example, where there was no practice on how to link a mineral producer, a pulp and paper producer, and a tomato producers, which normally they don't speak to each other under normal conditions. What they did, they created an ecosystem where different stakeholders, they could meet together and with the help of external facilitators have a conversation what the possibilities were. What was the business case? What were the flows that were looking to be valorized, whether internally on site or whether externally? What were the technical needs we have already identified in order to make this ecosystem interconnect with each other? So even within the frame of a European project, which is very confined in time, you can have two totally different examples depending on the authority willingness to learn by doing or the authority's lack of knowledge to actually implement this on their side. So at the end of the day, I think it's important to put forward the power of the ecosystem. So if you have an ecosystem with stakeholders that are willing to discuss to each other, and they are willing to actually bring forward ideas that are forward-looking, we will have a dynamic which allows a business case to actually be built up based on the specific needs of different stakeholders. If the willingness is there, if the listening mode it is activated, we have the opportunity to create something that creates a dynamics which actually can change the narrative from passive into an active one. And when we saw the presentation by the authorities in Frovi, they took a risk, but at the same time, they become front runners for other regions to build on this business model and to see what the possibilities are elsewhere in Sweden. And they have been serving as a best case or best in class also in the Nordic on how the learnings from this specific case study can be replicated elsewhere and can be adapted elsewhere. We are not speaking about one solution fit all, but the learnings, they can be applied elsewhere.
Right. Thank you, Aurelia. Mariana, you had a question?
I want to challenge you a little bit, Aurelia, there, because you said the power of the ecosystem. But
Yes.
from your example, it really seems as the power or the willingness of the local authorities. So which one is it? Because for me, it's at some point in time, there is an authority that has power and makes a decision, and the ecosystem can try to influence them, but it boils down not to the ecosystem, but it boils down to the authorities, I would say.
Well, I think within the European Union, we have to be respectful of the rule of law. We will not be able to operate outside of the rule of law. And I think we have all, as different stakeholders, we have to be aware on the opportunities created by applying a very stringent rule of law, but also sometimes identifying the ecosystem needs. And the role of the authority in this case was, we don't know about it, but we are willing to learn about it. We are willing to have a discussion about that. So the ecosystem can serve to create the dynamics for the exchange, and the authority is there to learn, but at the same time also to build a dialogue with different ecosystem stakeholders. So at the end of the day, it's not about a bottom-up or a bottom-down approach. It's important that we start to have a dialogue. And I think as part of the dialogue, we also should not underestimate the power of the facilitators, which they are nor for one specific stakeholder, nor for the authority, nor for another concerned, directly or indirectly stakeholder, but the power to allow the exchange to take place. And I think for me, it's the ecosystem that create the dynamics, but the willingness to listen, the willingness to exchange, the willingness to move a step forward towards another stakeholder, it creates the right dynamics, and it facilitates, at the end of the day, also the decision-making process.
Yeah, thank you, Aurelia, and thank you, Mariana, to bringing it up. Ian, I can totally see that you have a follow-up question, but before I give the floor to you, I just want to follow up one more step on this. Aurelia, you are very right that these things did happen within the two different Swedish lighthouses, and that also brings me to the local regional level and the importance of policy in the local regional level, which is not always, as you described, like a softer approach, whether we should support a stakeholder dialogue or not. Sometimes they're a bit more concrete. And what I have in mind is that the land use planning approaches, the local procurement specifications, sometimes the local energy or waste management policies in the local regional level. We also observe that, and they are of course more formal, they are written documents, they are binding. They also seem to create different conditions that support or hinder industrial symbiosis. I mean, one example, we have one Swedish municipality which some time back, they wrote something very simple into their municipal energy policy. They said residual energy has priority in our district heating system. That completely stopped the conversation about whether different waste combusting facilities that can generate the heat cheaper should have access to it. Residual heat became the primary source. And I don't know whether I can turn to you, Tobias, because I know that you or your colleagues also work quite a lot at the local regional level, and I can even invite Ian and Peter to the discussion because Peter worked in a context where they experimenting with land leasing rather than selling and to see whether that can be actually used as a leverage point to put some new demands to the new industrial activities. Ian, I know that this is an actual issue that in the context you work. But first, if I may, and Ian, I haven't forgotten about your question. Please hang in there. But Tobias or anyone else, do you want to say anything about this local, regional level policies and what kind of conditions they create? Would you like to say anything about that?
Yeah, well, I'm not really an expert, but to give one example that I can think of, and it's also related to what we discussed earlier with these differences in implementation, that one area where the EU has legislation but is not involved in the active guiding of the legislation is when it comes to the extended producer responsibilities. So we're getting more and more of these producer responsibility schemes, but when I'm talking with my colleagues from Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Estonia, where we have business today, they are affected completely different by the same EU rules due to the differences in the national implementation, and this can then, for example, be the result of the use of directives instead of regulations. But when then talking about extended producer responsibility, I know that the definition of what then covers by the definition municipal waste concept differs in the different member states, and that Sweden has some kind of their own definition in this case, and that we then have lost business areas due to the fact that some waste is now under the public or municipal responsibilities, depending on the definition of municipal waste, which is then different in other member states. This is not really the answer on your question, but we, depending on how depending on definitions, we then lose business to other sectors.
Right. I mean, I can actually answer my own question because the local and regional policies do make a difference. They create green spaces for industrial symbiosis developments, and sometimes they can also create hindrances. I mean, one example I alluded to earlier, another one is that we have another Swedish region which, before making a decision for the public transportation, they had a system view. They looked into a wider range of actors in their context, and they realized that if they chose biogas as the choice for public transportation, they can actually benefit the farmers, they can benefit a wider range of actors in their context. And by making a procurement decision to buy biogas for public transportation for 10 years, they created the market conditions for a lot of new actors to make investments and create a lot of industrial symbiosis. So not everything is determined at the national or EU levels, that at the local regional actors also have leverage to create policies to create conditions. And I know, Peter, that you turned your camera. Maybe you're going to say something about certainties, but Ian has been patiently sitting, so let's give the word first to him to take his question. And I saw that Marianne has a very good question on the chat. Hopefully we have time to reflect on that too. But Ian, after 15 minutes, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think I forgot my question, but thanks,
Good.
Murat. My name is Ian Hamilton, and I'm organizing industrial park outside Norrköping. We call it Händele Eco Industrial Park. Not part of the CORALIS project, but your discussions are very interesting to us, and thank you all the speakers. But I was just wanting to take on Aurella's nice passage regarding permitting, which is definitely troublesome in some of our areas. But I think it's nice to hear you mention a Swedish example. And to tie into that, I mean, we would like in Sweden, I think also researchers point this out, that we have an openness in Sweden, we have a trust between private and public organizations, and that is many times mentioned why we can get along, and we try to find solutions in that setting. Saying that, we have a number of examples, and Murat might have picked them up, where you have different ruling on a municipal level and on a regional level. Same issue, same material, same location, but they derive at totally two different decisions, and that makes it troublesome for businesses naturally. But what I wanted to take on is actually, Aurela, you're really showing how you try to work within the value chain and so on in the Swedish examples. And with that, Tobias, I would like to ask you, since you are representing a Swedish company and you are now trying to move this issue in Brussels, how do you work? And can you use the type of Swedish discussion mode and trying to bring in a consensus? Is that your approach? How are you going about moving these issues, please?
Yeah, thanks for the questions. As I said in the beginning, we are working towards all the EU institutions. So after being present in Brussels for a couple of years, we have kind of established this. We have built up a quite broad network of contacts within the institution. So our goal has been from the beginning to make sure that the institution also knows us. So now, a few years later, we are part of different expert groups because the really important part in lobbying towards the institution is to be as early in the process as possible. You really need to, when the Commission put the proposal on the table, then it's basically too late to make any major changes. You want to plant the seeds already from the beginning. So we have targeted the Commission and we are kind of now trying to be part in planting the seeds for the Commission to then take further. So trying to be part of the dialogue before the Commission even has started talking about the initiatives. So now, for example, next year we expect the Commission to put forward a Circular Economy Act. And this is, of course, very important for us. So already last year, we were in discussion with the different units working on this in the Commission, and hopefully we can feed in the input we want so that when the Commission then put forward the proposal on the table, then it's more in line with what we want to see. So it's all about being present in a very early stage and hear what's happening behind the closed doors, kind of. So you can't underestimate the importance of having feet on the ground, so to say, in Brussels. I hope it answered your question.
Yeah. You muted, Murat.
It's the first time it's happening. Of course, also giving the politicians the right signals so that the roadblocks can be removed and more supportive conditions can be created is important. And from my experiences, it also looks like that maybe requires another kind of symbiosis between the actors. I mean, I know that, for example, Tobias's company Ragn-Sells works very closely with the Swedish Farmers Association and their businesses, as well as the animal breeders, etc., to really demonstrate that the phosphorus that they create is actually doesn't have any adverse impacts, etc., and that ecosystem needs to come in place to actually create the credible knowledge and bring it to the authorities to make changes. And something similar happened in the Swedish context, that the iron and steel producers came together, developed rather long-lasting research projects, and they showed that the slag that is produced in large quantities from their processes commonly could be put into certain applications in a safe manner, which then allowed them to productify a waste stream, so that actually now the iron and steel companies can have a much shorter route to turning them into a sellable product in the market, which was a collaborative effort. Before I take the question from Marianne, Peter, do you feel comfortable about maybe telling us a bit about the Sötenes, which is a tiny municipality on the west coast that is among the front runners in Sweden in supporting industrial symbiosis developments, And we have not really organized for that, Peter, but you have done these things in many occasions. Can you maybe just give us one or two examples of how a small municipality even can create good policy guidance for industrial symbiosis developments?
I will give it a shot. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Karlsson. I work for a foundation called Chalmers Industriteknik in Sweden, and I have previously worked for this municipality in the Swedish west coast called Sotenäs. And I mean, we have worked with policy-related issues in the municipality to promote symbiosis development for many years, and one area was connected to the water directive, where a company wanted to build a land-based salmon farm with very little emissions to the sea, which was the issue for this case. And one thing we did was to also go to Brussels together with the Swedish delegation, working with the directive to talk to the Commission about the implementation in Sweden. And in that case, the answer we got back was that it's not about the directive, it's the Swedish implementation that hinders this development. Come to Italy instead was the answer. But after many years, finally, like 2 weeks ago, the company got their permission after a permitting process for more than 8 years. And this is something which is on the topic in Sweden, to reduce the time to get the answer for your environmental permissions to actually build industries in Sweden. And another thing regarding land use is that a municipality in Sweden owns some guidance about how to use the land. You have a detailed plan how the land should be used in the municipality. So by working with that, you can actually steer what kind of use you will have of the land. And also in that, for an industrial area, you can also promote different kind of industry, which can be promoting symbiosis development by setting the scope for this specific area. So you can work with a local governance, but also as Tobias said, you need to be where it happens also, and discuss with decision makers on different levels, on local levels, on regional level, on national level, on European level. And we see that the implementation is very different in different regions and in different countries, which makes it a bit tricky to work with from the local perspective, how to develop local symbiosis networks in your community, as you don't know about the situation before you start this processing stage.
Right. Thank you, Peter, for this clarification as well. When we set up this webinar, we suspected that we need a bit more time than the other seminars, because there's a lot to say. We added 15 minutes, which obviously was not enough. I think there's still quite a lot to talk about, but we really hit the time that we so kindly asked from you, and you granted to us. Mariana, I promise that I will buy a beer to Tobias if necessary to get an answer for your question, which I think is quite a relevant one. I would like to thank again to Luca, Aurelia, and Tobias, and also Roberta, who was with us, but we didn't have the chance to give her, and everybody else who joined us. I find it very useful. Hopefully, so did you. And hopefully we'll see you around in our screens in real life, and keep making symbiosis happen. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.